let's talk about where we're at now, what's new, what we've been up to, what's changed since all of this started in October. Thanks very much to Janson and NABET for sponsoring this event. So why don't we start with you?
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'm honored to be on a panel on International Women's Day, being a man, the only one on the panel. Thank you for allowing me to be an ally and support you in the hard work that you've done to date and what we have to do going forward. So, as you know, as we acknowledged here, going back a little less than a year ago, allegations broke out online. The Me Too movement exploded, and rightfully so. And the industry came together under the leadership of ACTRA to come up with a response to that, what we were going to do. And today the Code of Conduct came out, but there's a number of other initiatives that are going to be put forward. And so the plan for today's events anyway, were to have a candid discussion about where those policies, where those codes of conduct, where the response meets the individual and their complaint and their experiences in the workplace. And so that was sort of the goal of today's panel, and I'm honored that we have people that are here that are able to address that. But I think because it was led by ACTRA, I think it would be best to have Theresa walk us through sort of what's happened to date as far as the policies and the code of conduct.
All right, let's go. You know, this was instigated because Mia Kirshner came and said, what the hell, I had my own Harvey Weinstein moment. And I sat in that room with her and said, you know what, Mia, you've come to us. You're the first member to come to us and actually say, let's focus on this. And I promise you we are going to do exactly that. But we can't do it alone. We need to bring the industry together. So, y'all know what happened, right? And we all had our homework. As soon as we announced it after a Q's meeting on national CBC television, we had calls coming from everybody, including the Academy, including TIFF. I mean, just everybody wanting to be involved, schools, everybody. And we brought 55 people into that room. We hammered out our industry-wide aspirational statement in 6 hours. 6.5 hours, which included 3 working groups. The first working group that is reporting with results today is the ACTRA-led Code of Conduct. But everybody was involved. And my friends, if you look, I mean, how proud can we be? Look at the color on that press release. 26 organizations, gatekeepers of this industry who have incredible reach into their memberships, into the workings of this industry, be they unionized or not, have signed on already, and other organizations are signing on every hour. So what we have done is listened. We've done homework, all of us, with our members. And we've listened to the gaps, the women and men sometimes, who have lived this reality of living through not just sexual harassment, but bullying and discrimination and violence and loss of opportunities because you are a woman, because you are self-identifying female in whatever form that means, because you are Indigenous and you just don't have those opportunities. And we said, what do you need this code to be? And that's what this reflects. We have our work cut out for us. This code is just the beginning. Right? Because not everybody can afford to do the work that some of us can afford to do. So we will train, we will welcome you in, not just our members, non-union folks can come in and take our training. All of this is based on consent-based interactions. And we are going to lead by example, my friends. This is a living document. It is just the beginning of all the work we have yet to do.
So Catherine, can we go to the DGC next?
I am also pleased to say not only was the Directors Guild a part of creating and implementing this code of conduct, but the DGC also will be releasing today the result of an audit that we have undertaken to examine our own organization in consultation with staff and more than 100 of our members across the country. And the result is 12 recommendations that have also been passed by our National Executive Board moving forward, and things that we can do immediately, things that we can do with a little more work, and things we can do with a little more work again, because this is not a situation that happened overnight. It was decades in the making. It isn't something that we can solve overnight, and it isn't something that we can solve on our own. We, as an industry, have to work together. Every single person on a set, in a production office, at a wrap party, or wherever the employment, wherever the workplace is, we all have to be working together to solve this problem.
Beth, so given that we're all in your house right now, in Canadian Screen Week. Sorry, that was meant to be a compliment, not to add pressure, but I can see I just did the opposite. Sorry. Beth, do you want to bring us up to speed on kind of how the Academy is relating to this? Because we've all got such a different vantage point on this and a different relationship to how the issues are expressed in the industry.
Yeah, I won't take up too much time, but I will say that I want the Academy to be a platform for meaningful conversation. And I think that, the Academy has a unique position in the industry because we work across sectors. We work with the broadcasters and the producers. We work with, the distributors and the funders and union and non-union. And so my desire is that the Academy is a place where everyone is welcome and we can have these discussions. I'd love to give the floor to Aisling to talk a little bit about After Me Too.
It's funny that you mentioned Mia Kirshner because After Me Too was co-founded by myself, Aisling Chin-Yee, Mia Kirshner, and Freya Ravensburg, and in response to the lack of response that was happening within our industry to the sexual harassment, sexual violence allegations, and claims that were being ignored by the police, by our industry, by our unions, by our guilds and associations. So we had to do a response. So we came together as individuals who work in the film industry. I'm a writer, director, filmmaker, producer, and working with 2 actors, writers, directors, activists, and producers to look at what we need to do to actually take the stories, take people that are breaking the silence coming forward, and what do we do to actually enact change? And that's within our industry, but it's also looking at it in a holistic way that sexual violence has been happening around the world for a very long time, and we are not the first industry to ever deal with this. So for us to self-govern, for us to think that we are going to come up with all of these answers on our own without the expertise of psychologists, lawyers, civil lawyers, criminal lawyers, mental health resources, trauma experts. We're not going to be able to do this holistically to help everyone within our industry and within any industry is very, very, very misguided and short-sighted. So what we did in November, December, post After Me Too, we came together with a group of volunteers, all intersectional, all putting their time and energy and hard work and blood, sweat, and tears into putting together a symposium along with the Globe and Mail as our foundation to kind of help us host the roundtables where we brought together performers, crew, writers, directors, producers, as many people that would volunteer from the guilds and the associations that would come forward and be part of our discussion, as well as civil lawyers, criminal lawyers, mental health psychologists, memory psychologists from all over North America, and labor lawyers as well, to have a very, very, very in-depth conversation about what's going on, what's the problem, what are the pitfalls, how do we deal with them, and with the idea that we will come up with recommendations from these discussions. We had 12 round tables that were each about an hour long each out of these 12, 13 hours that we put together over 2 days. What were we going to do? And also I left out organizational change experts, technology experts, because we're not going to be able to do this without the technology to be able to safely report, put together, alongside with the psychologists, trauma-informed resources, services, supports for people that have gone through being victimized, that are survivors of very, very, very psychologically damaging experiences that actually changes their well-being, sacrifices their livelihood, threatens their safety in a way that can be enacted quickly in our industry and without our industry, and with actual consequences to the perpetrators that are being let to act with impunity in our industry that seems to have gone on for a long time. So that was the reason we created After Me Too. On Tuesday of this week, we released a report that we've been working on since then that has been put together from the discussions of these roundtables and also alongside an advisory board and a consulting company. Again, all volunteers of their time because of the necessity of dealing with sexual violence against women and vulnerable people.
So before we dive even further into what's next and what more we can do, I do want to just kind of reach out to the room because, as Aisling said, we've been saying this from the beginning, everybody has been affected in some way. There's nobody who's not at least a bystander. And we're all part of the solution. So I just wanted to see if anyone in the room has any questions that they would like to ask at this point in time. Mark.
So this is a question for the union and guild reps on the panel. As an employer and a producer, what assurances do we have from your organizations that should there be a complaint that we're investigating, we come to a conclusion that there's remedial measures, possibly termination for that person, that we have the support that there's not going to be obstruction from the unions to terminate them?
So that's a great question, Mark. And if you don't mind, I'll take a first run at that from a producer's perspective. So, Mark, in your inbox, you received a note to members today from the CMPA. Because when we approved signing on to the industry-wide code of conduct that we collaborated on the development of with ACTRA, we also instituted a member declaration. So there is now a standard set for CMPA member behavior that relates back to CMPA's workplace harassment and workplace violence policy and program. So what it does is it gives CMPA a tool that allows us to ensure that if a producer member is a bad actor, there is now a clear disciplinary process for that person, and a proportionate consequence would be decided after an investigation and based on the decision of the board or the executive committee. So that's now in place at CMPA. I think there's an interesting conversation there to be had, and this is something for much further down the road, not much further down the road, it's really soon actually, is, for example, if an individual needs to be fired off a show, but if the producer doesn't pay them in full, they are in a position of potentially being grieved. If that person has been found to be guilty as a harasser, should the producer have to pay them out? Would the union actually grieve if the producer didn't? These are questions that we're going to have to engage with, and that's a collective bargaining thing or whatever. I don't know. But that's very much to the heart of the point that you made about obstructionism. But with regard to the CMPA, we do have that disciplinary code and process in place. And Jonathan, I know you wanted to answer that too.
Yes, because it's an excellent question, and it's important that I would say if an employer, and if we look historically if I talk about our organization, our local's experience, we have actually done more investigations internally with our own members from member-to-member harassment, where we have disciplined our own members than ever have I. If I was to take all the employers that have been signatory to all the unions, I would say that the union, our local, has probably done more of those investigations. I'm immensely proud that a lot of the historical work we've done were sort of guiding principles that were incorporated into our larger document. So if the employer did a proper investigation that the unions were partners with and helped and assisted in the investigation to get to the truth about what really happened, and the discipline that was provided or meted out, if it was seemed to be or deemed to be appropriate, was proportional to the breach, most likely there would not be a grievance or a dispute of the penalty. In the case that we've seen historically, and I think we have to be truthful, so I'm trying not to be disrespectful, but the truth is most film producers historically, in general, ran to termination anyway, regardless of, without even conducting investigations. So I would love to see investigations properly conducted, done appropriately, involving employers, involving employees, involving witnesses, involving the unions participating as active partners. recognizing that we have obligations to our members to represent them. That doesn't mean ensuring that we are condoning behavior, but making sure that people are treated fairly in the circumstances through the investigation. I would say that you'll see that most of the organizations, if not all of them, are willing participants in active investigations. We historically have been, but definitely now, under the microscope that's been shone from the Me Too movement and the After Me Too movement, they will be willing participants in getting to an effective resolution. All of that subjected to unions have obligations to their members under the law, and so a member could compel us to file a grievance based on any sort of disciplinary action taken by the employer. What we do after that fact is the union then owns the grievance. We can do board, depending on the merits of the grievance, can either dismiss the grievance, not take it forward, but that is all through product of discussion with the employer. And you have to have open, honest, trusting discussions in these matters, and I think that's what we should be working towards.
Yeah, I don't think there's a fast answer that will fit all circumstances, and the notion of proportional consequences, I think, is really important. And also the idea of zero tolerance is really important, because terminating someone, having someone leave a show and then go on to another show is not solving anyone's problem. And so, when we're looking at restorative justice, where there is a process, where there are, in the circumstances that it would be appropriate to have oral warnings, written warnings, and then termination, that's already prescribed in our collective agreement. And it's, as you mentioned now, as I can historically say, I would like to say that our organization has always been primarily interested in a fair and due process for in all situations, that this is particularly important now, and that employers will have the cooperation of the unions, and the unions would hope to have that same cooperation with the producers.
And it's one of the first conversations I had with members of the DGC, with some of your leaders. It's that we don't want to see ourselves digging into our own areas where we have to give due fair representation that flies against knowing that one of our members was wrong. I mean, we have to be also morally doing what's right and working together. And that's a newfound collaboration. We certainly at ACTRA know that our members are not innocent, and we're going to take due process against our own, and we're not going to dig our heels in. And I just want to answer to the great work that After Me Too is doing, and I said this to you privately, but I want to say it publicly, that what I was buoyed by in looking at your 9 proposals is how much the conversation is the same across the industry. And so many of your proposals are things that we have decided we also need to implement. And so we're so much on the same page. And that this work has started, but the code doesn't preclude anyone from digging into their own policies and creating their own internal codes, just to reiterate. But
yeah, and Jonathan wanted to come back to something.
I think this was touched on by Catherine, which is it would be incredibly irresponsible of our organizations to say that it is just up to the employer to do these investigations.
Right.
Because, as we know from us, for people that aren't familiar with how the film industry works, every production incorporates a company. So technically, for that production, call it XYZ Season 1, XYZ production is incorporated. You might have a harassment investigation. That company does it. It's for that individual. And then those two same individuals and that producer, a few months later, could be on another production with a new company, and none of the decisions that were made by that previous company can legally be transferred to the new company. So the unions, but my point, the unions being one of the consistent organizations with all these individuals between the companies, I could not just let a harassment investigation go on one company and know full well that complainant and those respondents or whoever involves now go to another production. And that's why historically we have taken measures to discipline, expel, and deal with members. And I'd love to say that we took it on because we were altruistic 10 years ago. It came from a really difficult learning experience we had where we got it wrong as an organization. Our members essentially allowed a harasser off of information that was all agreed upon statement of facts to get away with a slap on the wrist. And so we adjusted our policies to deal with that. We have taken, as for the Nordicity report, interim measures. I am very familiar with, because we take them on a regular basis to keep members apart. We've had cases of domestic violence. We've had that has spilled into the workplace, member-on-member harassment, individuals between organizations, which historically, to be fair, because we were in our own individual positions of having to represent people, we didn't cooperate the way we should have. That we are changing. And so the organizations have equally weighted responsibilities besides the employer to ensure that that is tracked consistently from employer to employer, from individual to individual, through their progression through the industry.
That's great, John. Thank you. Yeah, Aisling.
And one of the things that we have recommended as well in our report for After Me Too is that there is written in everybody's contract the 100% prohibition of sexual assault and violence, so that you should be able to terminate somebody and suspend somebody, and that there should be and within the technology that we need to create that is going to be tracking perpetrators, that it should be cross-union and cross-guild, so that we don't have we need to have that conversation between all of the organizations so that we know if somebody is a repeat offender, that they are put on a list, they are put on some kind of do not engage list, and they should be, and the pressure should be that they are suspended or lose their membership, red flags. Almost immediately.
Catherine?
Yeah, and we are going to run out of time. We won't be able to get to the 12 recommendations that you can find on the Directors Guild of Canada website at dgc.ca. But a lot of our recommendations that we are putting forward will address exactly this issue, whether that be a third-party human resources group that will be able to facilitate and assist both members, organizations, and the employers. We have a number of using technology to be able to allow individuals who have issues to be able to report and log and date stamp their reckonings of the event, so they don't have to go over and over again, and also that there are technologies now that will allow you to track, so that if there are multiple instances with an individual, there are actually software that will allow people that have these situations to be able to contact each other. So, there's 12 of them, so I encourage you to go to the dgc.ca and read through those.
And just following through, I'm going to just make one point and then I'll go to you, Beth. Following through on that, the tracking and all of that, one of the working groups, one of the 3 working groups, the Code of Conduct, the Code of Conduct came out of, is a working group on reporting mechanisms that CMPA is leading. So that's looking at exactly all those kinds of technologies, like information escrow apps and tracking and things like that, call-in lines that Sue Milling is taking a look at, and all of that. And so, Beth, over to you.
Well, I do think that it's important to look at inherent biases as well. We, before this happened, I had to go through our workplace policies just as an employer, and our sexual harassment policy had 1 paragraph about reporting and then 3 paragraphs about the investigation. The only mention of losing your job was if you made a false accusation. And I don't know when these were written. It was probably decades, ago, really. But you just have to look, the big shift here is that for the first time, although there's a witch hunt, people say, women have been sort of hunted literally as witches for decades, and for the first time, their word is being taken as gold in the general, court of public opinion in a way that that men's voices have been taken as gold, and so to me that feels like the real shift here. And I think that it's a lot to ask unions and our own industry organizations to be unbiased to a distance, to have this be really effective in terms of holding people accountable. So I do believe that it's extremely important that we have some sort of independent body outside of, your job is to advocate for actors. And so, that includes people who may have been accused, who, are insisting on their innocence, and so we need I really do feel like we need an organization that's separate and apart from our small industry, where it's a safe place we can go. We won't be judged. This whole industry is all about relationships. We all know that, and if you have a complaint, there should be a safe place where you can go and say, look, I saw this, it wasn't right. And you won't be sort of tagged as a troublemaker or, just even, I'm not even talking about very extreme. I think the actual more worrisome stuff in a lot of cases is where it's not super extreme. It's not like it's interactions that I saw at the Canadian Screen Awards, last night, and I was like, I just feel like that's a little uncomfortable, but I don't want to speak for her, or I don't know what's going on there, and those are the places that I think that's where the culture gets perpetuated and leads to more violent things.
So I think with that, unfortunately, we do have to wrap it up. We're at time. So I want to thank everybody on the panel, and I want to thank all of you for your interest and for your participation. Thank you very much.